everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Happy New Year, everyone. How is as everything gets crazier and crazier? How are your lives? How are your brains? Speaking of everything getting crazier and crazier, on today's episode, I talked to musician and scholar Daniel Wyche. If you remember, Daniel was on the show before. Well, let me just read you the bio I wrote that explains that. Daniel is a visiting assistant professor in Albion College's Religious Studies Department and a brilliant guitarist. His album Earthwork was one of my favorites in 2021. And, well, I mean, we break down these things into years, but a continuing favorite of mine. And after his first appearance on the show back in episode 514, I think, we become friendly. As a former philosophy professor and current philosophy dilettante, I thought it might be fun to go off-topic-ish for this, the first episode of the new year of 2023, and have an actual PhD on to bounce my well-thought-out, yet unresearched ideas off of, but mostly to ask the question: is there a way out of our society's current irrational tailspin? Yes, that's what I wanted to do. I had this thought. Well, look, here's the basic gist of where this all came from. I've been feeling very surreal lately. For the last, I don't know, a long time, but really like daily surreal feelings for months now. Between the just abject societal COVID denialism, the climate denialism, just essentially almost the entire swath of reality denialism. It really makes my brain swim to be bombarded by so many hyper-normalized beliefs all the time. And it made me start to think, have people always been this irrational? And it was just masked by other things, or, there wasn't social media at the time, so you didn't get to witness their irrationality. You were just kind of limited to whatever irrationality found you. Or have we become more irrational with time as the contradictions of capitalism intensify and, we all become more isolated, consumer-minded, and, as post-modernity kind of infects everything and, pushes us all off into our own little narratives? Is that, is it a phenomenon that has intensified with time? And that's what I wanted to ask Daniel about, get his expert opinion on, and he's great. He's very thoughtful, very insightful. I don't know if we answer these questions necessarily, but we do walk down that path quite a while. We're getting near. I mean, look, no one's going to, on an off-the-cuff podcast with a philosophy PhD and a former philosophy PhD, me, we're not going to get to any perfectly delineated answers, but we're getting close. It was enjoyable. It's always just nice to talk to Daniel anyway. If you like the stuff that I'm talking about, by the way, I started a Substack last year where I write an essay every couple months when I am not writing scripts or doing podcasting stuff. But I write about these kind of topics and about other philosophical things that I have been thinking about or reading, and they're not super scholarly, but they are, as I noted above, well thought out, researched, cited. I cite my sources. Got to cite your sources. This is actually the thing that when Jerry Stahl asked me a couple episodes ago if there's anything I've been doing that I'm proud of, I couldn't think of a script that I was necessarily proud of, but I did say, oh yeah, my Substack, I'm proud of that. So you can find that for free at theslowdystopia.substack.com. And hey, while I'm plugging things, my old Casio pop band Harm, we put out our lost album last year. We recorded it before we broke up right at the end of college. Found it again while we were digging through hard drives over the quarantine part of the pandemic, and we're like, oh yeah, this is great still. And so we just put it on there. You can find that at andybeckerman.bandcamp.com. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman, valiantly still trying to just write jokes, non-topical jokes mostly, on Twitter. And, of course, cat pics, dog pics, pictures of Naomi. Go to Instagram. I have some fantastic episodes coming up, so stay tuned for those, including Jim Zub, wonderful comics writer, Alina Lowensohn, who you might know from a ton of Hal Hartley films, Terry Winter, the creator of Boardwalk Empire, Sopranos writer, and that was just an absolute delight of a talk. So stay tuned for those. Subscribe to the show if you haven't already, wherever you get your podcast from. But for now, let's talk to Daniel. What I used to do in high school was, if I didn't know something, I would there would be like oh yeah, like that, and then like a laugh or something like that, just to so I don't have to say anything. So like it's not even like anyone was judging me because I didn't know a band or a movie or something like that. But that continued on until, I don't know, another 10 years. And then I'm just like, it's okay to not know what Killdozer, it's okay that you've never heard Killdozer.
Yeah, it's totally fine that you've never heard Killdozer. It's funny because, I don't know, I was always so self-conscious about not knowing the name of a band or something, but I never really judged anybody else for it. And then I sort of think maybe nobody really cared what other people, we were all so worried that other people were judging us, but no one really was doing that because we're so wrapped up in our own anxiety or something like that. Yeah,
I wonder. Well, I've always had this weird... Again, I don't know about weird as being the modifier there, but let's go with it. Let's just say weird mentality where I just assumed everyone was not me. Like, I'm not saying everyone was like me, but I'm like, everyone has the same relative amount of rationality and everyone has the same relative amount of anxiety or whatever. And maybe they deal with it better, but we're all feeling the same stuff all the time. And then the older I get, I'm just like, no, you're weird. You're genuinely weird. It's okay. It's okay that you're weird.
Yeah.
But your beliefs and your understanding of logic and rationality and all that kind of stuff. The only thing where I am like other people is, when I was repressing my emotions. But now that I express my emotions now I'm like, oh great, now I'm weird again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. You think, well, I'm sure everybody's sort of inner life is just like mine, and all the same things make sense intuitively, and all the other things that don't make sense to me don't make sense to them. And then, you read things or you talk to people for 5 minutes and you're like, holy shit. There's a deep chasm between all of us. The whole, the problem of other minds is it's totally real and it's actually a problem. And, just don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I've created a life where I don't lie to people.
That's amazing.
I say that, sometimes I do. Obviously, I'm not this pure Kantian being or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
So I do lie to people, but I minimize it because when people lied to me when I was younger, I saw right through their lies for the most part, right? I'm sure some slipped through, but I'm like, oh, you're lying to me. And so I just assumed that because I could detect everyone else's lies, that they could detect mine. Right. And then the older I get, I'm just like, no, and it's all scary, but I'm like, no, I can manipulate people. It's easy. It's actually pretty easy to do it. And it's one of the reasons why I'm just kind of the older I get, I kind of stay away from it just because I'm like, it feels a little icky too. And anytime that I'm doing a businessy thing and I have to be charismatic, and I have to and I'm like, oh, well, I could do this all the time if I wanted to. I mean, if I really had the energy to, but it feels weird.
Sometimes you have to put on a show. I don't know if I'm teaching or performing or something like that. I know I'm performing, I got to amp it up a little bit or in a certain way and behave in ways I don't behave when I'm in my pajamas. That's okay. Obviously that can shade into lying, but I was reading this thing the other day. It was an anecdote from Bertrand Russell where he was actually criticizing, the whole Kantian thing. He was like, no way. One time I saw a fox run by and I was out, going for a walk. And then these hunters came and they were like, which way was the fox? And he's like, of course I lied to them. sent them in the other direction, And one time a few years ago, I was at an art residency with a friend, and we rescued this dog that somebody seemed to have abandoned. And there was it was in Wisconsin, and there was this rule that you had to take the dog to a shelter or whatever in the same county. But the county we were in just had like a kill shelter, and we didn't want to do that. So we took the dog and drove to Madison, which was kind of a ways away. And I called them and I told this entire story about where we found the dog. And like, I know Madison okay. And I was like, yeah, we just found this dog. We were at this park, came running up. I walked around the neighborhood. I checked this street. It's like naming streets and all this other stuff.
Like with you have Google Maps open and we're
in the car driving, and I'm like looking at Google Maps and I was like, and I went down to this place and I called so-and-so, and like, I have friends that live there, and I like Madison and stuff. So, but really laying it out. And they were like, okay, did you, I was like, yeah, we don't know. I think the dog ran away. Or somebody abandoned it. We don't know. Can we bring it in? It was like the Humane Society. And then they were like, they totally bought it. And we brought the dog in, and it was like, I'm pretty sure we just saved this dog's life. It was a really sweet dog. But after I got off the phone with, the Humane Society, my friend Bridget, who was driving, just turns to me and goes, holy shit, you're a good liar. And I was like, thanks.
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate it in that sense.
Right. I mean, there's a certain mentality. It's the same. I don't know if it works for academic and musical works, but it's definitely the same facility that I use to try to create a world in a script.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, okay, imagine what the world, what like the house looks like, and what the people are, and what would a person walking up say to this person there, and that kind of imagine a facility that like helps you build a world, helps you lie well, whether it's a lie in the service of something good or something bad, or however you're judging that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the same kind of thing. I was like, oh, cool. I feel like you've just like maybe not complimented my lying, but maybe you complimented my acting and like imagination, and like resourcefulness. So I'll take that, like I can present something in a compelling way, and like that's cool, and make it seem real. Like I don't think that's bad, It was just like getting people excited and stuff. Like I have to get my students excited all the time and like make them really like invest, and like so much of that is just about my performance in front of them, like getting them psyched in a way. I'm like, holy shit, guys, you'll never believe this fact about like 3rd century Christianity or some, whatever, or like some fact about like a radical Jewish sect in the 1st century who was like fighting the Romans or whatever. Like they get really invested, but I really have to like, jump and sing and dance and stuff to get it to happen, but it works.
Yeah. How much of that stuff from the early part of the hundreds, somewhere around there, how much of that stuff in a Hegelian way do you see present today?
Depends on what you mean. Like what, there's a lot of stuff going on at that time. It's a lot of upheavals, yeah, it's a good question. It also depends on for whom, right? Like you have, let's see, in the 100s, you've got a lot of various changes that are going on in Rome. Obviously, got like, the emperor type thing happening that's been going on for a bit now. Republic is gone.
Hold on. So I'm gonna instead of like pretending like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about exactly. Also, by the way, your side's recording because my internet sucks today.
Oh yeah. I'm getting a little. Your voice is a little pixelated sometimes, but it's okay. And I'm recording too.
You're recording your side. Great. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Great. I just double checking. So I've already had enough anxiety today. One of the cats. So we got a small Christmas tree because Naomi was missing Christmas. So I got her a little tree, and then they've been eating it at night. And then one of them threw up today, and I'm just like, oh, if you have a blockage, I'm gonna lose it. But it seems like he's
throw up like tinsel and stuff or whatever.
Nothing was in
Christmas tree. It seemed really nice.
It is nice. I mean, I don't as a Jew, I'm not particularly thrilled, but I'm thrilled to give Naomi the Christmas experience she is missing. So
I mean,
that's
look,
good.
man, here's a fun fact for you. As you may know, we use the Gregorian calendar. Back in the Roman days, they used the Julian calendar, just slightly off by, I think it's off by 13 days now, and then it'll be off by 14 eventually. But you may know that the date of Sol Invictus, or the, celebration of the winter solstice, which the actual celebration of Sol Invictus as a holiday has some, there's questions about when it actually started and so on, but was celebrated on December the 25th in the Julian calendar. And, so just consider yourself, I mean, tomorrow's the solstice in our calendar, but, you can chalk it up to a solstice thing. It's, you've got some nice, the days are going to get longer, and like the sun is great, and it's not going to be as dark. And like, these are all things to be happy about. Maybe, I don't know.
I've made my peace with it. It's fine. It's fine. It makes her happy. I'm glad to give that experience, even though that's the one, there's a line I drew in the sand. I find this, I don't know if you found this, but there's like certain lines that I thought, like, as a, not child, but like when I was younger, that I'm like, all right. Cause I had relatives, Jewish relatives who also had a tree. And I was just like, it just feels like there's this line that you cross it and suddenly your identity is lost in some way. And to me, like a tree, or like, I mean, this is totally across the line, but like if you would have a crucifix or something, obviously it's just like, well, you've stepped out of the realm of Judaism at this point, and you are now in something else. And whatever your something else is fine, but like it was important for me to like, as when I was younger, especially in such a Christian area, to really define Judaism down to like in a very analytic, philosophical way. Like, here's the definition of Judaism, and if and only if X, then Jewish.
Yeah. I can see that. I feel like I don't have a good answer to this, because I just, it so really depends on different people and stuff. And I don't know, like, grew up celebrating Christmas and stuff, and always, like, I have Jewish cousins, and, they did Hanukkah. And I learned early on that, like, the whole, like, thankfully learned very young that Hanukkah is not Jewish Christmas, that it's not actually even a major, well, I guess there's some debate about how major of a feast, festival it is in the Jewish calendar. It is, I think, one of the, man, you'll know better than me, but I believe it's one of the three that there's a point in the Talmud that says it is supposed to celebrate the miracle publicly. And so that's got to count for something. But I don't know. There's a great question about, like, how much do you give up before you've actually given it all up, kind of thing.
Yeah. Ship a Theseus type shit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. No good. I have nothing to say. I'm not sure. There's so much. No, but like, it's such a good question, and it's something that I think a lot of people like wrestle with, right? Because we've got so many different kind of cultural threads in the U.S., and everybody's trying to hold on to their sort of really, valuable and cultural experiences and backgrounds and traditions and stuff that all like mean so much, and yet we all still like stuff that other people do, so like, how do you maintain it, let it change in a natural way, but also don't dilute it to the extent that you've lost something, right? I think a lot of people, and there are these like massive assimilating forces, like the concept of whiteness, for example, which is just a bulldozer that is supposed to
killdozer
subsume, which is a killdozer, literally. It just sort of subsumes everything. Like, my mom's family is Italian, and she tries, we're like third generation or something now, so it's like fourth or even, I don't know. She try to like keep all the Italian traditions going and stuff, but it's, it's not like people are really able to speak the language that much, and things like that. And so where does it all go? Like, what does that end up meaning? And I feel like one thing I do think a little bit in that regard, like, Jewish traditions are so like strong and clearly defined in a way that's really nice. You just like the volumes of people talking about what it is you're supposed to do. So you can be like, all right, we're going to do this, and you get to have that, a certain kind of clarity, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm
I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking as you're talking, like, one group wants to define themselves to know like to know like what is it to count to be one of us, and the other wants to do that to kill us, like to like vilify or something like that. Whatever. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be Judaism. It could be like trans men and women, or any group that's being attacked at the moment. It's like, well, what counts as X, Y, or Z? So that, and one side, so your allies, and then the other side, it's like to know your enemies. Strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would think your allies are the ones that are like, okay, so we all have menorahs, but then you have Hebrew Israelites who say that they're the original Jews and Ashkenazi Jews are not. Or you have like Ben Shapiro type shitheads, like Orthodox Jews, who say that secular Jews are not real Jews, so that they can...
Right. Yeah, and of course the latter, also like you're stuck between so many, and like the latter are also the people that like dominate Israeli politics, for example, or like certain American communities and things like that. And also like the whole Orthodox thing is actually pretty historically recent. It really comes as a reaction to reform and to like Enlightenment threads. So the idea that like, I mean, you're not out there, there's no priesthood making sacrifices at a temple, though I know there are people who want to go back to doing that. Like they want to like, actually do animal sacrifices and stuff. I'm pretty sure it's a minority, but still. So it's weird. And that thing about the Black Hebrew Israelites, like a couple of my students asked about that the other day because of Kanye West. And, it's interesting, like this thread and this theme of trying to claim originality is something I'm always really interested in, because there's nothing at all about the fact that something is older or original that makes it more authentic or more real or something like that. But that's an assumption lots of people have, right? And this is like a point, in philosophical context, it's one of the points of like genealogy, the search for the lofty origin. It's just like, why does that have why is doing the thing that happened earlier more valuable than, say, the tradition that came about later and has maybe richer and more well-developed, reasoning or thought put into it, or who knows what, there's nothing. So that's something I always try to like disabuse them of, but that's exactly the kind of thinking that you have with like the Black Hebrew Israelites, who are like, we are the real or original group of X. And it's like, what does that even mean? And like, also, who cares, for example, if someone converted last week, how would that make them less real?
Yeah.
There are things about people who convert to new religions that are interesting in and of themselves, but that's not somehow less authentic. And it really is creepy in lots of ways, because it that sort of thing trades in so much stuff about like, like bloodlines and like who descendants and all this other weird stuff. That's like that we got to get away. That's not good. Clearly that stuff has not done much good for anybody. So.
No, well, that's conservative thinking, right? So that's right. The whole thing that like, I think where somehow like the original matters, no matter what the truth of the original is, because obviously like right-wing conservatives now completely just manipulate. Like it is essentially like just about power, right? I mean, is that, and this is okay. So this is like the larger question, and maybe we can get into this a little later. But I do want to go back to asking about the first century or so. But a larger thing I've been trying to figure out is, did rationality ever work? Was there ever a time when you could argue with someone and convince them you were right just purely by logic? Or has it always been an emotional affair that you convince, you manipulate, you kind of like just appeal to someone, or you just coerce them through whatever, through either a weapon or a threat, or, like capitalism is like economic coercion, that kind of stuff. Was there ever a time where like, I mean, I've been writing this essay, and again, in my little dilettantish way of writing an essay, but like, I remember reading Peter Singer's book about, what is it called? Animal Liberation? Is that the name of it?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I remember it convincing me to become a vegetarian. Now, I was already on the fence. I already stopped eating beef. I already stopped eating pork, and I never ate seafood in the first place. So all I had to do was give up chicken and turkey. And I was like, so I was already like mostly there. And then this like kind of, so I think there's like boundaries. There's like on the edges of things, maybe a rational argument is like a coin toss. Like sometimes a rational argument, if someone's like already kind of feeling it, maybe it can push them over. But I wonder if like, if
my
like
thought on this is that I think it doesn't really help us to make a distinction between rationality and like emotion or something like that. Like those are both really fundamental parts of what we are as a species, and they seem to work together. And so if you're trying to convince somebody of something, you need to deploy both of those things, like passion and care and like empathy and stuff, as well as just like information and facts and stuff like that. I mean, also like, depends on what we mean by rationality, right? Like a fact of some kind, right, has no necessary consequences to it. And that's kind of interesting, right? Like, there are people who were like, you can come to all kinds of conclusions based on all the other concepts and beliefs and stuff that you happen to have floating around, on some fact, there are people who you tell them, this behavior is like making climate change in a really bad way. And to you or I, it's obvious that means, oh, human beings are going to be in danger, even if it's not us immediately. We should stop doing that. Other people will just look at that and say, that may be true, but I don't care. Right. And so like the fact itself needs some other apparatus around it, or like a scaffolding to help you get somewhere, And I remember like, having this conversation with students where every time we'll do like, conversations about like sexuality or sex or something like that. And there's always some kid who says, but we know now, whoever we is, that like, there's a gene for being gay or something like that. There's some kid who just wants to express this fact. They think that there's like some genetic basis for, whatever, being queer or something. And like, that may or may not be true, but there are there are a lot of people who are homophobic or hateful in various ways who would take that fact and say, oh, good. That means it's a disease that can be cured. You know what I mean? So simply identifying the fact of, say, a biological basis for something that has all kinds of consequences for different people, right? So I don't need to know that there's a gene or whatever, biological basis for like whatever to think it's just wrong to be shitty to people,
Right.
Some other people might take that as a really something they can seize on in order to be even more shitty to people, or shitty to people in new ways. And, you see this in lots of contexts. So I don't know. I do think too, though, I think about this a lot because there's something I just heard about recently from a friend who's a really credible activist called deep canvassing. And, like canvassing, when people go door to door and talk to people and stuff, that seems to work really well. That seems to be a very effective way of getting people to vote for somebody. It's probably like addressing actual people one-on-one. If you can get them to do that with you, seems to be the most effective way to do this. And this other process really involves like just long-term talking to people over a long time, getting really deep with it and stuff like that. And it seems to me that like rationality does work, but it does take a while and it takes a lot of commitment, right? Like people's views change for various reasons over the course of their lives, often pretty radically. But I think an important part of that can be, it doesn't have to be, but it can be that just comes from like hearing arguments that they find more and more persuasive over time. Like, so, I don't think I think it's real. I think rationality is real, but I think it can't be distinguished from, say, emotion or something like that. And I think it's like a long haul process, not a, you're right. You've done the math problem and now I'm going to change my political views or something like that. That's my thought. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. It is because I'm in DSA here in Los Angeles, cool. And, we've been like, we just got him elected, but, we were campaigning for Hugo Soto Martinez, who was a labor organizer, and he was running for city council here. And it was this long-term commitment of a year of campaigning and going out, not door knocking. That was the main part of the strategy, was door knocking and going to every part of the district and talking to people. And we did that we elected Nithya in CD4 back in 2020. And that was all based on going around to every part of the district of CD4 and knocking on doors and talking to people. And that's where the most substantive conversations were had, as opposed to like sending a postcard or
Right.
or seeing a tweet. Like I'm
Right.
pretty what's the word I'm looking for? Critical. Sorry, I wagged my finger to jog my brain to thinking of what the
Yeah.
what the word is. I'm pretty critical of DSALA's social media apparatus, because I think it's a minor part of everything. And it's nice, I guess it's fun to make a fun meme or whatever, but I'm just like, we've seen what the actual work is and how to actually organize. And so why are we not putting our energy into that strategy, as opposed to, and there's a lot of parts of CD13. So Ugo is now the city council person for CD13, that most of them probably are not on Twitter or whatever. Right. I would say like probably a majority, because I did the math. There's like, I looked up the stats. There's something like 250 million, something like that, maybe 300, whatever, monthly Twitter users, 300 million. And there's like 7.5 billion people in the world, something like that.
Right.
It's like, I did the math, like 6% of the world's population uses Twitter on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And that's a very small slice.
And they don't always use it for like all the stuff you want, everybody else wants to use it for. Like, and like, I mean, this is the thing. I think a lot of people think this. Actually, going back to your earlier question too, a lot of people do think that like hearing an argument or even like a good gotcha is somehow like a politically effective thing to do, and especially online. And I think a lot of people who are like extremely online really think that everybody else is also extremely online. And I remember a friend of mine, my friend Dan Denver, who. A good old friend who has the podcast The Dig, which is great. Dan
I love that.
And he's always people are always yelling at him about stuff, which is like, this guy does such a good job. If you can't leave him alone, like come on. But people are like, because he's talking about canvassing, and he's been really involved in Rhode Island, which and where they live now. And somebody's like, what's the point of that? I remember somebody saying something to him like, we can communicate at light speed with the internet, and it's like, what? Who thinks that? Who thinks that like just putting stuff online actually has any bearing on really convincing people? And you've obviously know this from your own experience, like sitting down or even standing there, looking another human being in the eye, getting not just the content, but like the emotion or like the body language or just the like reality of it, and saying like, hey, this thing matters, please think about it. Like, that's completely different than a fucking meme, Right? I think so.
Yeah. No, it is. And I think that like what it requires though is actual, I was going to say whatever the opposite of laziness is. Cause it's like to go do that, you have
what
to
is
like
the opposite of laziness. I don't know. I have no idea.
Cause sorry, I already formed the thought in my head was like, oh, well that person's lazy. Like, cause it is, there is a lot of like, and it doesn't have to be just laziness. Like it's not a moral judgment necessarily, but I know that I have so much stuff that I do on a daily basis that I don't have a ton of energy for outside of those like tasks that I have to do. Mm-hmm. So I think of myself as lazy at the end of the day because like I didn't go canvas this one. I only canvassed Saturday. And I didn't canvass Sunday or whatever, even though I had 10 other things to do and I'm in the middle of like 5 different projects and whatever. Right. So I don't mean laziness necessarily as a moral judgment, but just to say that like they didn't want to, and they didn't feel the whoever the person is that's like, we can communicate, we can organize at light speed online. They don't have in their lives, they don't have the material pressures that push them. And even I don't have the material pressures really, right? Like I've always been middle class. I've been broke for, a long parts of my life. Like, there was definitely a good like 12 years where I was broke, but I'm middle class. I could have always moved back home if I really was in trouble. So I'm not trying to like pretend like I am like some working class Joe or something like that. Yeah. but there are no it's a moral pressures. Why I do the things I do is because I want to build a better world.
Right.
But there are people who like have material pressures who are like, no, like if I don't build a better world, I'm fucked.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And there are people who see that too, and they see it clearly, and it's amazing. Right. Rather than just like, oh, I'll just do what's good for me in the short term, rather than like something that's going to stop the whole, stop this, whatever it is the problems are, whatever the most pressing problems are from continuing to happen or getting worse and so on. Yeah. I think about that a lot. I was thinking about this issue of laziness because like I think of myself as being lazy. And like, I'm always like, oh, I'm so lazy. I didn't do anything today. And then like, my wife's like, I made 3 records in the last 2 months, and I'm writing a book, and I just submitted a proposal for another book. And I'm like, clearly I'm not lazy, but I feel lazy. I feel like I get up too late and stuff. And I'm like, oh no, I don't have time for anything. I'm like, cause I'm so lazy. I'm always sleeping or something. I'm like, I don't think something's going on here. It's also kind of goes back to what you're saying before, where like people don't understand what's going on in each other's heads. I don't think we understand what's going on in our own heads either, obviously. So that's why God invented therapy.
Well, let me venture this to you. I always think about like how the dictates of capitalism have formed me. Like how have I been formed as a subject of capitalism, or how has my subjectivity been formed within this system? And
how's your subjectivity
one of them
today?
it's a 50%.
Yeah,
I'm 50% of a subject, 50% of an object.
About there too. Sorry, you were saying though that's one of the.
But I think this idea of like having to be productive every waking moment is I was going to say remnant. But it's breaking down now, obviously. Mm-hmm. Like the contradictions are really intensifying. But it's still like we were formed in them, so it's up to us to try to therapize our way out of that mentality in some way. But like it is that like if I don't feel productive, like there's the emotional kind of like, and I used to have this. It used to be worse. Like when I was younger, if I would go into a store, I've said this on the show a ton, but like. Yeah. If I would go into a CD store, if I went to Coconuts at the mall and I didn't buy something, I felt like I was letting the clerk down. And I'm just like...
That's really sweet.
Like, they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit. Yeah. I worked at Pathmark. If someone... In the dairy section.
I worked at Pathmark too.
Really? What'd you do?
Produce mostly.
Okay.
But, yeah. Produce was the good job.
Dairy sucked because you were in the back in the cold a lot.
Dude, you got milk hands if you worked in dairy.
Yeah.
And I knew a guy who got his earring infected because he had milk hands and he touched it in high school.
Like I'm sorry, what's milk hands? I'm pretending like we're in this
when you work in the dairy part of the grocery store, you will there's like milk resin and like dairy resin on a lot of the like the jugs of milk and like the canisters of milk. Eventually you'll get that smell and like that resin on your hands, and that's what we used to call it, milk hands. It was fucking disgusting. And we always made fun of them. I forget the guys. I mean, this was very long time ago. I worked in this Pathmark in South Jersey, and well, this guy got milk hands, and he touched his earring, and his ear got infected. It was so nasty.
Jesus!
All the real amusing people worked in produce, so it's kind of where and those are the people that gave this guy hell. Like one of them, my boss made drew a cartoon about the guy getting his ear infected from having milk hands on a bunch of cardboard boxes and left it for him. It was great art. It was absolutely great. So anyway.
Why did your dairy section wear gloves? We had gloves that we wore when we handled the milk.
I don't know. The guy who was the manager, I'll never forget, of the dairy section he was like a Cold War sort of refugee from Czechoslovakia, and he was the manager and then became the manager of this dairy section in Pathmark in South Jersey. And he was just really intense, and he had all these weird turns of phrase, and he would yell at people all the time and stuff. So it could have just been the kid being flustered or something like that. And he would always if somebody who was a woman in the store did something he didn't like, he would yell, "Woman!" In this weird way. I'll never forget it. I mean, this was a long time ago.
I don't know about the produce section of Pathmark, but when I worked at Wyche, the produce section there was staffed by punks and skater kids. So so Wyche definitely had the cool kids in the produce.
Yeah. That's what. So I worked at like 3 different supermarkets in high school and then like in college for a little bit, and like it was always the punks that worked in the. And my friend at one of the maybe it was at the Pathmark. My friend Rachel, who was like this really cool like punk from my high school, like she was the melon person, which was like the person who chopped melons and made fruit salads all day, and everybody called her the melon girl, which I don't know if that was like I have to ask other people, is that like a title or is that just a thing that they said here? People would say, this is Rachel, she's the melon girl.
Does she have melon hands?
I don't know. I mean, she did wear gloves and she could chop like incredibly, but she was in like the freezing cold, like, the giant walk-in refrigerator area all day, like cutting melons and like, listening to God knows what.
I did like that I was allowed to listen to my Walkman at the time, because it was just me and the manager. So who was, I forget his name, dude with the big red beard. He was very cool. And he kind of like this. I mean, this is not like the greatest job in the world. So he let, as long as I got the stuff done, he was pretty cool about, whatever. I just remember listening to like Dead Milkmen and
nice
and Super Chunk. Here's Where the Strings Come In. I guess that album was out around that time, and I was listening to that on my
That's fantastic.
Yeah. Those particular I mean Lemonheads, whatever the Lemonheads album is with like Hospital.
I haven't heard much from old Evan Dando in a long time, although he was the major 90s indie rock heartthrob guy or something, if I remember correctly.
Did you ever understand that? I remember just like, because I liked the Lemonheads, I just assumed everyone in indie rock was like, again, like not part of the mainstream of society. So like, I remember there being like this, I think it's Rolling Stone or Spin. I think it was Rolling Stone that did this big article on Evan Dando. And I remember him being like this like drug addict, and he like hung out with models, and I just didn't understand it. It was like very strange to me. There was a lot of my youth where like when one part of culture like got into another part of culture, when the Reese's peanut butter cups were occurring in culture, and the peanut butter was meeting the chocolate. It was so confusing to me.
I think I actually read that same article. I think I remember the one you're talking about, and I was also like, what the fuck is this? Like, this doesn't seem cool. This guy's supposed to be a loser like me.
Yeah, exactly.
You better get back to being a loser. I'm going to be, that's it.
Yeah.
Not listening to this shit anymore. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there was a lot of that confusing stuff about culture at the time.
Yeah, the whole decade was a bit of a mystery, even though it was great and stuff, but it's still... Just a lot of stuff I never really wrapped my head around.
Yeah. What was the last decade where you could like really be in the dark about what the world was like? Mm-hmm. Like a normal person could be in the dark about what the world was like. And then post like, let's say 9/11, something like that. You really had to do work to like, we're in this world now where like you have to do a lot of work, and people are doing it. Obviously they're denying COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But we're like you had to like really like your denial had to be extremely strong. And now we live in a world where like everyone is like a lot of their energy is going towards denial.
Yeah, that's true. Like whereas denial was easy and fun in the 90s, that was like the whole vibe, right? It's just kind of like, well, whatever. I don't fucking care about anything. Like that was like at least that's what we were told, right? By some people. Like, I remember that was also something else I found very weird was like the mainstream repackaging of like, I don't know, indie rock culture as the whole slacker thing and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, I don't know. I feel like all these people work pretty hard and like do exciting things and like actually do care about politics and stuff. So I kind of wonder a bit about, I always kind of go back to that. Like, wait, was everybody actually a slacker or something? Or was that just something that somebody created and sold back to everyone? Because like, I don't know, I knew all these punks and stuff, and everybody was involved in politics and like animal rights shit and like whatever, pick something, it's not like people didn't care about anything. We're like, I don't know, maybe it just was not I don't know, I hung out with punks, so like punks care a lot. It's like their whole thing. It's just like care very intensely about something. And maybe I missed something. I don't know.
It might have been. I'm trying to think if I knew people like that in real life, and I don't know if I did. I think it was a concoction of. I'm trying to like really put it like think. I don't know, because like all the bands I like, not all of them, but like a lot of them were, Sonic Youth, Fugazi. I've thought about this. I talked about this on the show, like post the George Floyd protests, where I was thinking about like Ian MacKaye was on the show and Thurston Moore was on the show. Cool. And I'm like, oh, your music, like, or, I was thinking also REM was a huge source of like learning about politics. And I'm like, a lot of this started with, a lot of my political consciousness started with these bands. So I'm really wondering, that Slacker character, is that was that placed on something? Like, obviously there are like bands like Pavement who were sloppy. But sloppy in an artistic way.
Right. And I was thinking of this, like, I knew lots of people who were depressed, and maybe were having a hard time and stuff. And probably lots of people were dealing with addiction. But like making that into this, like, I don't know, sort of very intentional thing where like people are like, my whole thing is that I don't care or something. Maybe I'm misremembering all of it, but that just seemed to not line up with my experience. And it sounds like it doesn't line up with your experience either.
No. So, okay, good. This is good. We're uncovering a lot of...
All right.
We're uncovering the dialectic of
I was thinking about this, too, about, like, people are always talking about, like, what's the role of, say, like, political music or something like that. And I do think this actually goes back to your earlier question, too, because I think about this sometimes. Like, is it simply to instruct people, right? Like, you're this age, you listen to Rage Against the Machine, and you learn about Leonard Peltier or something, and you're like, yeah. I think that happens to some extent, but like I've always been very skeptical of the notion that political music is music that somehow provides political instructions for people and like explains things. Because that clearly there are all these, like it's the hysterical thing about how all these like Republicans love Rage Against the Machine, and like Tom Morello's always like, fuck up, what do you think we're doing, and stuff like that. And so I was thinking about how I kind of, you were talking about how like, talking about listening to those bands and stuff when I was young, just because like my dad had just impeccable taste and still does. Like we would listen to all that great stuff, but we listen to Billy Bragg all the time and things like that. And I realized that like I definitely learned a lot of facts and stuff about politics and so on. But I think some of it, what it helped do was provide some direction and framing for sort of instincts I already had, or experiences I maybe was trying to make sense of myself, like, come from a pretty, like I remember my grandfather would come home from work and like be working all day and like take off his belt and like chug Maalox and stuff because he was like, my dad worked, like literally I saw my grandfather do this all the time. And like, my other uncles who worked at like, one uncle worked in a plastic factory on the night shift and my dad was in construction, all this stuff. And like, that music, I think more so than reading things, especially at that time, gave me some resources to like start putting the pieces of all these things I could see together in a way that made sense. And like, definitely some of the stuff in like, bands like Sonic Youth and other kids, but more like, the Minutemen maybe, or like, again, like somebody like Billy Bragg or like King Ford and some of these other things that like kind of encountered early on through like my dad's friends and stuff, and some of the stuff from the 60s too. It kind of helped like I was like, oh, okay, these ideas, especially put in such, as great songs, like they help me make sense of all this, like what I'm looking at and what I'm already kind of thinking, right? It doesn't feel like I'm getting instructions on what to think here. It feels like I'm getting resources and tools to like make sense of the world. And those seem to be very different things to me, And I think that when music is political, that's what it does in a good way. And it doesn't, I guess it can't be ham-fisted, right? Because then it's just like, hey, here's what you should think, or here's what's true or something. And you're like, like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah. There has to be some artistry to it. And so, I mean, but I would say even in their most strident, like Minor Threat, there's artistry to, that.
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I don't think those guys are, like Minor Threat, or certainly not Fugazi, are like ham-fisted or obvious. I think that like Fugazi especially, and I'm sure for you too, just like we're the same age, like like going to see Fugazi and getting involved in that scene and stuff, it helped the world make sense in a good way, and it provided some models for like community and stuff, and for ways of building community and just like ways of being with other people that obviously had some flaws and stuff, but really had a lot to offer. Going to see Fugazi was such a meaningful experience, not just because it was like amazing music, but like just felt like something important was happening. And I think a lot of people took that with them in some way or another,
Yeah. Well, it's this thing that I'm always constantly searching for, which is community, right?
Yeah,
not just like aesthetics, but also like some kind of moral community. And I think, a band like Fugazi or like anything kind of centered around Ian MacKaye a little bit is going to have that kind of like both. Okay, we're all probably in the same aesthetic arena, and we're all probably in the same moral arena.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that like, as I keep thinking about rationality and how is everything breaking down? Because really, it's like the question is like, okay, the Enlightenment died. This is my theory. Enlightenment died in World War I. Everything's broken down and everything's like falling apart now, right? Or we're in an interregnum or between paradigms, or this is just life now. This is just life for the rest of human existence. And maybe the next paradigm is this kind of just like flailing where I forget who the writer is, but they call it like ontological dizziness. Like you don't have kind of like, you don't have a solid thing to grasp. Everyone's falling and you just grab onto like kind of like what's around you. And there's your kind of like lodestone, if I'm using that word correctly. There's your North Star.
All that is solid melts in the air, as the man said. That makes sense to me. And again, that's why I think like that. I think that goes along with the way I was saying too about providing resources to make sense of the world, and to like fit it together in a certain way. Again, because I think people are like dizzy, like you said, especially now. Like it's surprising, and I feel like it's kind of only dawning on me how confused people are at the moment. Like, thought like, this is tough, but everybody kind of understands what's going on. And I'm just like, oh, wait, no, that's just not true. No one knows what's going on.
No.
And I feel like I had a little bit, I don't want to say I had too much faith in people because I don't want to sound that pessimistic, but like just kind of feeling a little bit more like I have a strong sense of the reality of the situation in terms of like what you were just saying in terms of this dizziness and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think, okay, so this is what I've been trying to figure out, right? So what are people grabbing onto in this kind of like ontological dizzy headspace? Where are they going? What are they grabbing onto? And at the bottom of this, what are the things that are going to what's the next stage? Because I'm like, what is it going to like pull everything back together? And there's no going back. But what's the next stage?
Yeah, what's the dialectic? Going back to your Hegel.
Yeah. Is it community? Is it because the things we've been talking about are like, what actually like bonds people together? Community in some way, right? And it's like it's community that capitalism has destroyed by like it turning us into these kind of just like individual consumers.
Yeah.
So then community is in some way, if there is a next stage, that's not just fascism, which probably is what's actually going to happen. But like, let's hope something better is possible.
Oh, God, I think about that every day.
And if we can, then it has to be something community centered, right? That, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but I'm trying to think through like, again, what was there? That's almost like why I started asking you that at the beginning. Like what was there in the first century that still exists today? Because I'm like, well, what is still around? What's in this kind of like, I always imagine like the dialectic as a stew, and there's like vegetables in there, and some of them are at the bottom now, but maybe they can come to the top, and but there's also like pieces of bone in there, and maybe you want the bone to like, I don't know.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually, weirdly enough, is like, what is it? Because in a lot of ways, like say like people in the ancient world were like really different than us. And like thought different things and sort of seemed to have felt different things, and just different stuff made sense to them and everything. And yet they were also, I've been reading a lot about the, I like to go on these rabbit holes, but this is also partially for work. You know about the greens and the blues? I
know the words I don't mean just the colors, but like I know kind of vaguely what you're talking about, but please.
These are the two factions of chariot race fans in Rome, and then up into the Byzantine, period, into the Eastern Roman Empire, where it's centered in Constantinople. And like these people were basically like professional chariot race hooligans. And like, they were like, I don't know what else. I don't know what to call them. They were like factions or clubs, but it doesn't seem like they were like young dudes and some older dudes. And their whole thing is that you were either on the green team or the blue team in the chariot races. And there were other teams where they got absorbed into these. And like, they, in Constantinople and other places, they actually had like sort of a lot of political sway. And like the emperors and others would task them to do things and like use them as security for stuff. And there was these things called the Nika riots at a certain point in I think the 5th century, where the chariot race hooligans like basically destroyed most of the city. I forget what they were pissed off about, but like it's one of these bizarre things where like they probably had some legitimate concerns about some kind of tax policy or whatever. And I know that I could look this up real quick, but you know, the point is that like, but like the way it all went down was that like it was the chariot race fans who like basically destroyed the city and like caused all these reform, you know, and all this other stuff. And it's just like, what the fuck, you know, like that's so people, we don't, but like, I don't know, you know, it was the World Cup. People absolutely love soccer. Like you know, my wife's English. And so we hear a lot about like, you know, soccer fans there, like they're like a faction of people that, and they're really important. Or like the guy who, there's the English guy who like, you know, he went out of his way to express like solidarity with Palestine during the World Cup. And like people were like, you know, what the fuck? This guy's just a soccer fan. Like he's got no right to talk. And the guy was like, they gave an I watched an interview with him. He was very articulate. He was like, just because I'm a fan of a sport doesn't mean I'm, you know, I don't have political views and other things. And I mean, also if you think the World Cup's not political, like, come on, you know, it's so, but it was just like, oh, there's this weird, like, the more things change, the more they stay the same kind of thing. You know, I don't know.
So you're saying sports violence is the one theme, is the one thread that has like connected really, the last 2 millennia.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. We're like another example. I was thinking my students, you know, as you know, the United States is a very Christian country, but it's specifically very Protestant. And it's, you know, evangelicals are a large part of that, though not a majority, despite what they, you know, it might seem. And a lot of the evangelical rhetoric, for example, and I think other Protestant rhetoric too, make claims about like, we need to go back to the early Christian church. Like we always talk about the early church. And I have students who, you know, have this view. And then like we learn about the early church and it is just completely unrecognizable to what an evangelical Protestant in the United States in the 19th or 20th century would at all recognize. It's, you know, proto-Catholicism. There's lots of rituals. Most people, like literacy was, depending on where you were, wasn't so great. So the idea that people were going to like, one of the big things is like, pick up the Bible and read it for yourself and so on. And like, probably not happening, especially since it was in like at least 2 languages in Hebrew and Greek, and the Greek and the Hebrew were sort of different in different parts and so on. So like the idea that there was this sort of pure version of what people think they want now that existed to that, it's just like completely incomprehensible. Like, yeah, we still have Christianity, and it still has a lot of things in common with some of the beliefs and stuff of the people living in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd centuries. But like, you know, the way that they did that, the way they lived their lives and the way the world made sense to them was just so completely different, especially when you compare it to the people now who keep holding up this like ancient origin as like this really special thing that they are somehow claim to be representing. But like, A, they don't know anything about what that world was like or those people. And B, if they did, they'd be really surprised that it's really fucking different. You know, 1st century Christianity in like, I don't know, Italy or, you know, Jerusalem or some Egypt or something versus 20th century, specifically Protestant Christianity in the United States now is like, or 21st century. Those are pretty different things. You'd be hard pressed to actually, I with a few, you know, obviously there's some core things, but like, I think even the same tradition, I don't know, you know, but that's like another example of like, you know, we still have that, but man, it's quite different.
But yeah, okay, so it's different. So it's interesting too. Going back to the thing where we were talking about like origins, where there are certain people who think that origins are the most important, or like the original is the most important, and that anything that comes out of that is I don't know about debased, but like is lesser
debased
than.
Or something, or right.
So, But then when you actually confront this again, this goes to this rationality thing. When you actually confront them and say like, well, have you actually read, like, the people, like, it drives me nuts. And I live in this kind of like surreal state all the time in the last couple of years, because like the stuff where I'm like, oh, well, you're Christian. Well, then you should believe the stuff that Jesus says, like the main character of your part of the Bible, who says like, turn the other cheek and love thy neighbor and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any part of there where he's like, no, you got to kill everyone and all this other I'm 99% sure there's none of that in there. Yet you like, if you would confront them, like I just ignore the people, but like I'm sure if they would just like tell you, like, I don't know how they would say it, but they would figure out some way to say that it doesn't matter, or that it is or somehow still incorporate that into their worldview and not change.
Yeah, that happens all the time, right? You get the people to like be like, Jesus said like, blessed are the poor or something, and they're like, well, what he actually meant was blah blah. And there's people who literally do this. They just like have these convoluted ways of sidestepping this stuff, but it's like, I don't know, man. That guy was pretty cool. At the end of the day, he actually seemed to be pretty all right, and like part of it is because a lot of what he said was just a lot of very sensible shit, like, and it's a lot of it's like, poor, don't be shitty to the poor. Don't worry about this stuff that's not important. Like, care about these other things. Like, take care of people. Like, whatever. You can find these things in like various sermons and stuff, and it's all like, it's like pretty reasonable advice. And it's like these people really bend over backwards to come up with something completely different. Like, and then claim that they're interpreting it literally, which is like, you guys go through some of the most convoluted, like weird interpretive, like gymnastics ever. There's nothing literal about what you're saying.
Well, then why hold on to that identity? If this, again, this is going back to like where we were towards the beginning, where it was just like, well, I think this stuff isn't like, if I have a tree for Christmas when I was younger, I thought that was like crossing a line in terms of Judaism. Now as an adult, I'm just like, well, it makes my wife happy, and it really does. Like, I don't know, what did I bring into the house and suddenly like I can't speak Hebrew anymore or whatever? Like that didn't happen. So like it doesn't, like, maybe it's more that I'm more sure of myself. Like, is this all based? Is this? Right. I don't think we can actually reduce it to one thing, but if we could kind of just like muse on one thing, is it insecurity, where you need to have this identity, even if the identity doesn't actually conform with what the beliefs are of the thing? For some reason, these people need, like, I'm Christian, and if I don't have that as part of my identity, I don't know who I am anymore. So even if I don't believe these things, even if I really don't believe, and I have to like do a lot of like weird twisty justifications to explain why Jesus really did what Jesus really meant when he said, love thy neighbor or whatever. Right.
Yeah. It's weird too. Like I appreciate what you're saying, because there's this like, people are very tied to certain identities and certain ways of sort of understanding themselves in a way that when they lose that, it's a total crisis in their whole, and I've noticed this with certain kinds of people, but I can't make a pattern. I can't pick out a pattern here, right? You have people who are raised like extremely religious and they're like, fuck this. And they kind of just chill, but I've known people who were like raised religious in some really intense way and were like really like true believers, and then like lost their faith. And instead of saying, oh, thank God I don't have to be a true believer and be so intense all the time anymore, which seems like, the way I think maybe it's good to go, they then become kind of true believers in something else, right? Like I knew people who like, they'd been hardcore Christians, they lost their faith and they became like, I don't know, hardcore like communists or something like that. And then they like lost faith in that and became like hardcore libertarians. And but it's always like an extremity. And it's like, where does this pattern start and what's the origin of it? And like, why, like, it seems to me that being sort of like obsessively puritanical about something is itself like both bad and not fun. And so like, why, when you get out of something like that, why would you go back into doing kind of behaving the same way? Or like, I see that a lot. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's the thing. So, okay. So again, this is a question. Are we in an interregnum between paradigms, or is it just, this is the new normal for another century or millennia or however long? But that's the Enlightenment, right? The person who needs to have all the borders defined
right,
down to the last molecule, and who like can't function. And I understand this mentality a little bit because I was like this as a kid and a teenager and a 20 something up until therapy, where where like if there was a gray area, it really caused me a lot of anxiety. And so I needed everything to be defined. I needed to know, are you my girlfriend or what? Right? Because I don't know, like, we're smooching, but what is this? Like it was
start taking notes, right? Like, okay, yeah.
Right. So I that's the question. So are we in a new world where these are the remnants? These people are the remnants, the dying embers of the Enlightenment. They need everything defined. If their identity collapses, they need to grab a new identity that's as defined as the last one immediately, or else it causes them anxiety, or like, again, it could be just this like very like gut level thing where they're just like, I don't like how this feels, so I need to again, ontological dizziness. I need to grab onto something, so I have this kind of to get rid of this vertigo.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That's a really great question. Like, because I don't know, is this just a fact about a bunch of individuals, or is it actually, like you're saying, a kind of paradigm or cultural thing or something like that? And like, I don't know. And frankly, I hope that if there is a new paradigm, like, we live to see it, and it doesn't take 1,000 years, or a good one at least, And like, I don't know. I despite all my better judgment, I somehow end up being an optimist and start thinking like, it's like, I don't know. I was listening to like the January 6th stuff today and things like that, and sort of thinking about all of these people, all these like far right people, and their like reemergence, and their like the intensity and how active they are. And like, in a way, part of me wants to believe that this is the death gasp of all that stuff, because these people are in fact, I mean, they're dangerous and so on, but they are a minority. They are actually a pretty small group of people. The only reason any people like that get elected is because of gerrymandering and other stuff that's, voter disenfranchisement and things like that. But they don't numerically. That doesn't mean that they can't like wield power and stuff, right? But like, part of me really wants to believe that like the fact that they've become so intense again in the last couple of years is because they're sort of like backed up against the wall and are like clawing for survival, and will soon like, sink beneath the mud of history or some shit. And like, I know I can't like act like that's obviously true. I want to believe that that's what's happening, but I think also like, history, like MLK said, time is neutral and depends on how you use it. If people are, invested and directed in defeating those forces, then that's the only way it's actually going to go away. It's not going to go away by itself. But like, I don't know. My hope is something like, it's all just it will be defeated soon. And this is just its like last death gasp or some shit. And maybe things will be all right. But I know I'm not really like, you can't hold your breath for stuff like that. You can't like naively believe that that's just going to be how it is and it'll be fine. It'll all work itself out, because it's just not how things work.
No, you have to not be lazy. So you have to get beyond the laziness. Yeah. Even if the material pressures are not on you directly, you have to get beyond you have to create the willpower to, I don't know if we're in Nietzsche territory here or whatever, but like the will, you have to have the will to see beyond your own material circumstances and know that like even if the pressure is not on you at the moment, it very well could be. And you must align yourself and align your will and your energy. I mean that literally, like the energy in your body to do things, right? With the side again. Okay. So I'm thinking this, if this is a new paradigm that we're in and it's not an interregnum, this is we're in a world of, it's not post-modernity in the sense that I mean, it's post-modernity in the sense that there's like no master narratives, but not in the sense that like relativity, like anything's open. There's just like a couple ways that like make sense to connect the dots. Yeah. And it's up. So there's a fluidness, but not like it's not a carnival. It's not like it's not anything's open to interpret in any way you want. Right. There's some kind of
Right.
There's like multiple correct narratives, but not all correct narratives. And you can kind of fluidly move, and you have to be comfortable in the fluidity.
Well, that's what I find interesting too. I think you're right, but a lot of people, and I see this in my students and see it all the time, think, no, it's either like there's an absolute kind of fact of the matter and there's a story that's being told and that's it, or everything is just completely meaningless or something. There's just like clearly neither of those things are true, right? There isn't just this one like
right.
Yeah, like master narrative, like you said, and that's it. Or it's just complete relativism. Like those are both, I don't think, very realistic, but it's hard for people to hold, multiple things in their head at once. Like there can be competing and many different ways of understanding what's going on, or just different forces that are exerting themselves and things like that. I find it kind of, this whole origins thing keeps coming back up because everybody wants to be a reductionist of some kind. Like everyone wants to be like, everything is about economics or something like that, or everything is about psychology, or everything is about some other thing. It's just like, everything is probably about everything, and other people like, it's all about religion and belief, and no, it's all about like food or something. And it's like, it's got to be about all that stuff, all the things that are happening to us as people, period, just as a species, and plenty of other species too. It clearly is, quite a mess actually.
Holistic fluidity. Can we, maybe that's what this is. And it's about,
I love it.
The people, it's about like somehow, I don't know. Again, this is where I go back to this question where I'm like, well, what is is rationality, does it have any foothold? It does and it doesn't. And it's all part of this kind of like holistic fluidity, right? In the right amounts and in the right circumstances. I mean, this is like going back to like what I was doing in grad school and why I eventually left was because I was doing, this is kind of like, I'm saying it in a different way. I'm realizing as we're talking, but I was doing complexity theory, and complexity theory is all about boundaries and regions, and what in those regions there's like something called an attractor, and that's like the main idea of that region or whatever, and
like the sun or something.
Ish. I think of it more in like time, like terms of like fluid dynamics and things like that. Like there are just like in a river. I don't know. This is a bad metaphor, but like just think of like of how like there's different regions and different main ideas in these regions, and the closer you are to the attractor, the more like that is the thing, right? That is like what you believe or whatever about in that region. But there's boundaries between it, and the closer you are to the boundaries, the more you're like in between the two attractors, right? So, and I'm thinking about this conceptually more than I am thinking about this. This is why I went to go talk about like how in rivers there are like the more that like all the strands are of the river, like a river isn't just one solid thing of water. There are like strands of water underneath the surface. And when they're all going in the same direction relatively, it's placid. But you get rapids because they're moving at different angles to each other. And that means they're starting to interact in a very complex way, and they start bouncing off each other. And that's how you get the chaotic kind of rapids type stuff, right? It's the same thing for conceptual schemes. It's the same thing for like periods of time, like eras and things like that, right? And we just happen to be in one where all of the conceptual schemes happen to be like hitting at each other at weird angles.
And most of them suck, right? Like it's especially chaotic because it's just like, you're saying like neoliberal bullshit or hard right bullshit or fundamentalist bullshit, and like the sort of sensible kind of view of and way of being and stuff that just has very simple ideas like be nice to other people and don't fucking go out of your way to like hurt or oppress people, whatever, actually doesn't seem to have much pull, versus some of these other ones that just seem to, like, whether they want to or not, like the main harm just seems to be the big principle that unites all this stuff. So it's like, or disregard for other people,
because it's turbulent because the attractors don't have enough strength. So people are kind of like bouncing around from one to another, trying to grab onto something solid.
I like it.
That's that's the age we're in.
Yeah. Right. There's water at the bottom of the ocean, right?
Yeah. I don't know what we do. Maybe we can talk about that later. But
yeah, I mean, I guess it strikes me that just like, yeah, like you were saying before about just talking to people, like looking people in the eye and talking to them and trying to make sense of things together in a way that's like very human and direct and not like, over Twitter or some shit. Like that seems to be clearly, I don't know, that seems to firmly be a thing to do. As far as I
yes. So that's what it is. It's giving people, if they're ontologically dizzy, it's giving them the something solid as opposed to them just like flailing about and then like seeing something on Fox News that makes sense or whatever that makes sense to them, and they like grab onto that, and that's their new identity, or like it calms the anxiety for a moment, so they like just follow that, and they're now on that trajectory.
Well, I think about this too in terms of like, I don't know, I know people on the left are a little bit wary of this concept of like missionary type work or like converting people and things like that, but like I think things like canvassing and stuff are fit that genre of like kind of being a missionary, but in a good way. I mean, I don't think there's anything inherently, I mean, lots of missionary work is just completely evil in lots of ways. It's like tied to colonialism and like erasing people's cultural and ethnic and other histories and identities and stuff like that. Obviously the many examples of trying to force convert Jewish people, like completely bad, so, but it might be, I don't know, like I'm always thinking about like, is this a bad type of thing, or is it like a bad set of instances of a thing? But like going door to door and talking to somebody about like a progressive leftist candidate, I don't think that's something that is going to like erase who someone is. It's actually just going to hopefully make their material and then like, spiritual or psychological aspects of their lives like flourish more, It's not
existential missionary work.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's I think that's one of the reasons maybe a lot of people don't want to go door to door and like canvas and stuff, because it feels like you're, those poor Mormon kids who get forced to, go and talk to people. It's so, I mean, I find missionaries like absolutely reprehensible personally. And I think that sort of, especially in the religious context, it's like, it's just steeped in arrogance, the idea that you know something better about the like profound nature of the world than somebody else does. And I remember like, I was on a bus in Chicago and like these kids, they were like these white missionary kids. They might've been Mormons or something. I don't know. They're sitting there trying to explain Christianity or something to some like older African-American church ladies who it's just like, you don't know shit about anything compared to these women. Like, the fuck? Maybe you should listen to them. The idea that you somehow know something either about life or anything, or God or this, or Christianity itself, that they don't, is, you could tell by the way these women like carry themselves that they really know some shit, and like, fuck off. Like, go sit down and listen or something, or leave, I'd be so angry.
Wait, Daniel, I think a good way to end this would be,
okay,
if you don't mind. No. If you don't mind, do you mind telling the story about like when you were trapped on a train? Because that to me, is almost like the best metaphor that I can think of.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I've been thinking about like how does my experience. So I got trapped on an Amtrak train. There's one train that goes. Well, there are two, but that go from Detroit to Chicago every other day, I think. And I live in a small town in Michigan now, and for some reason the actual Amtrak stops in this town of 9,000 people I live in, which is awesome because we still have a place in Chicago and my wife is there. And the train's supposed to come at 8 a.m. and I'm sitting at the station for hours. Train doesn't come until like 2 in the afternoon. Jeez. I actually went home. I called Amtrak and they like basically somehow told me how to like get alerts for when the train was actually moving. So I went home and had lunch and did my thing. And then I came back. I get on the train and everybody on the train looks like a zombie or something. Like they've been through absolute hell. And it turns out everybody on this Amtrak There's no electricity. These people look like The Walking Dead, I swear to God. And some of them, though, had like formed like steel bonds of friendship and solidarity from like sitting next to each other. Because it turns out that train leaves Detroit at like 6 a.m. or 7 or something. And so people have been up forever, and they were trapped between Ann Arbor and Jackson, Michigan for like 6 hours. They were already sitting on this train. The train had the engine went, there was no electricity, toilet was filling up, so they had to close the, so the only way they could get the train to move was to attach another train to the front of it. And so I get on when they did that, and I'm like, holy shit, what the fuck did I just walk into? Oh, well, whatever. I was supposed to get this train at 8 in the morning. It's like 2 in the afternoon now, whatever. Train starts going, and like one thing after another, and it's like 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, and the train comes to a stop in a field next to some refineries and a casino and a highway in somewhere in Indiana outside of Chicago. And we're just sitting on this fucking train. People are losing their minds. And then this is actually nuts, because like this is like one of those examples of a thing where like I really believe in something, but also like in practice it was a disaster. The workers on the train weren't allowed to work for longer than a certain amount of time. That's the rule. It's probably in their contract. It would have been illegal. I'm all for that. But for some reason they didn't get a new crew at the previous stop. And so they stopped the train, apparently to change crews so that the people who couldn't work anymore could go home, which was fucking weird because we were in the middle of nowhere. And in the meantime, I think because they had detached to the train from it, the train that we were in, again, wasn't working. And so we're sitting there, people are losing their minds. There's this poor woman who is weeping because apparently she had said she missed a funeral.
Oh, no.
She's an older woman from Chicago, and she's just like, I don't know what to do. I was supposed to, or maybe it was the next day and she's supposed to get ready, but it was a very important thing she needed to go to. And there was this other woman who was like comforting her, and other people were like, and I'm like, I got to get the fuck off this train. I was like, the only thing I need to do is get off this train.
What time is it again? I was in my head when you said refineries and casino. I was like, well, that's America. Like, if there's a more perfect place to stop, there's just oil refineries and a casino. And I'm like, okay.
And a barbed wire fence in a field of very tall grass and a couple of highways. It's dark, right? So it's nighttime, right? I've been on the train now myself for at least 6 hours.
Jesus.
And it's stuck, and there's all these people like saying different. These two people across from me had like become good friends, and there were other people who, this other woman, this older woman, was comforting the other lady who was really upset. She was saying, and a bunch of us were like I said to myself, I need to get the fuck off this train. I realized that I need to get off this train because no matter what the conductors say, we are not going to get the train's not going to move. I know that the train is broken, and like it's another example of this. Like, totally support people not having to work longer than a certain amount of time, but it's fucked up that they left us in the middle of a field, where this happened. Also fully support Amtrak, and I understand that probably at the source of this somewhere is the Republicans defunding Amtrak, and like the engines or something probably are not being serviced and checked as much as they should be, and that's why this train is just fucking not working, limping its way to Chicago from Detroit.
Yeah. Or like the stuff that's been going on with I assume that this is maybe in the same realm as like the railroad workers who are shipping things, right? Are they the same unions?
I think it's different because the shipping, the freight rail is private and Amtrak is public. So I think it's a different thing, but there's a whole politics to that too that I am dimly aware of in terms of like,
Yeah.
But anyway.
But we are in a realm where everything is stripped to the bone. So like definitely like I'm sure there's something similar going on with these railway workers that's going on with the others where they are like, they don't get sick time because the schedule is such that no one can, everything breaks down if one person misses something.
Right. And I feel bad for these people, and people were starting to get real mean, especially to the new crew that got on. And like, even I was getting like, because the problem was the crew that got on, they weren't like, guys, we are so sorry. We're going to make this happen. We're going to get out of here. Except for the guy running the dining car, who's a fucking saint. He was giving out Budweisers, potato chips, whatever the fuck he had. He was just giving it to people. And that man probably saved somebody's life from someone losing their fucking mind and like a fight breaking out. But I think that was the issue too, is that they kept being like, no, don't worry, we just need to check all the air brakes. And then they were like, we're done checking the air brakes and now it's this thing. And people were basically like, we've been lied to all day about what's going on. We've been told hundreds of times that the train is going to start moving and that it was just one more thing. And at what point do you actually start believing your own experience? Instead of somebody telling you it's okay. I mean, this is like a big thing here. These authority figures are telling everybody it's okay. We just need to do this one more thing, when all of their personal firsthand experience suggests that they shouldn't believe them, especially since honestly, they weren't being like, we're so sorry. We will take care of this. It's going to be okay. Don't worry, everybody. They were just being very like, just relax. It's fine. We're going to get moving and all this other stuff. So my thought is like, I got to get the fuck off this train. And I met these people. They're a couple from Detroit and they had this cute little dog. And we started talking and I'm like, we got to get the fuck off this train, And so the one guy I was with who had a beautiful beard, just one of the nicest, like just not like a long beard either, like an incredibly nice, like short beard, which was really impressive in a lot of ways, very shiny. I'll never forget it. And, he just pulled a lever and opened the thing that opens the train thing. And one of the conductors is like, you can't get off the train. You can't do it. And he's like, I'm getting off this train, man. I've been on this train since 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. I have nothing to lose. That's 12 hours on the train. And so we're like, yeah, we're going. And I was thinking to myself, like, it was just like a very who am I moment. Like, do I listen to my instincts or do I just listen to what these people are telling me? And I was saying to myself, like, I knew the minute that train stopped that I needed to get off that train and figure out my own way home. I knew that would be fun and therefore I should do it. And I was thinking to myself, like, I want to be the kind of person who knows when he's got to get off the train and then does it and then gets off the train. And I definitely hesitated for a bit because other people, they kept saying it'll be fine. And other people, this one woman who had just this like very soothing voice was like, guys, we should stay on the train. It's going to be okay. It's dangerous to get off the train. Our lives aren't worth it. We're here together. We're going to get there and all this other stuff. And it was like very inspiring, but I think she was also, and she was right. It was dangerous. Like it was, but also just wrong, So we finally convinced the conductor we were going to get out on the one side. And he was just like, I can't let you out on this side. It's a live rail yard. You're going to get killed. There are trains coming and stuff. They can't see you and they can't stop you. You cannot get out this way. And the tracks are close together, I guess, and so on. So he's like, finally let us out the other side. And like, I felt very like, okay, like this is the person I want to be. Like, I knew I needed to do this. Now I'm doing it kind of thing. And like, it's like I think about all the time now. And then, so me and this couple from Detroit and their tiny dog and a couple of other people, some other people followed us, but we helped this woman who was trying to get back to Chicago to go to this funeral. Like she had called her granddaughter and her granddaughter was like on the highway. We could see her parked on the shoulder and it was like in this weird area, like very hard to find. We like helped her cross this field where this grass was over our heads and we found a fence and we had to figure out how to get over this fence. And like, luckily part of it was collapsed. So we had to like help this old woman get over a fence in like head high grass and stuff. And like finally made it to the side of the highway. And, this poor woman got in the car and everything. We called Ubers and eventually there was a stream of people just exiting the train and we were calling Ubers and the problem was that we were kind of on an off ramp almost. And so people kept going or like on the side of a highway off ramp. It was actually not clear, but in any case, it's just the kind of place an Uber doesn't expect to have to go. And so they kept pulling into like a weird lot that was like across the highway. And then a few people just hung up on us and canceled. And then the car started coming. And there's this other woman who was just like, she clearly wasn't, like she's not American. She had a thick accent and she was like weeping. I need to get to Rogers Park. And like, if you know the geography of Chicago at all, we're in Indiana. Rogers Park is the furthest north neighborhood of Chicago, right before Evanston. I mean, I just needed to go to Hyde Park and like kind of more on the south side. That is so far away. And like, thankfully, she just had no idea what to do. She was older. She didn't know how to use like any of the rideshare apps. And like, thankfully, this other young woman was there and like was able to get her. Like, they were going to go together and stuff. And then like, yeah. After 3 Ubers like going in the wrong direction, we finally got picked up on the side of this highway. And like there were all these like, I took some video of everybody, and then we finally like got in the car and the driver was like, what the fuck is going on? And we told her the whole story and like I became friends with these people. They're great. The woman she's from Detroit and her husband is like an art. They were actually, he was living in Chicago or they were both living in Chicago and they're moving back there. He was an artist of some kind. And they were actually supposed to move the next day. Like they were taking the train back so they could get like a moving truck, and it was like probably 11:30 by the time we got home, and they'd been on this train all day. And I was like, "Are you guys going to move tomorrow?" And they're like, "We're going to try, but we don't know." So I eventually got home, and I was like, "Oh my god!" And then Amtrak has kept sending me these like vouchers. I got a few $100 in Amtrak vouchers now, which is like the Michigan train situation. Maybe not so reliable, but maybe when I'm on the East Coast where it works a little better, I can go to like Providence or Boston or DC or something. But this is just like, I just want to make sure that I am somebody who, when I realize I need to get off the fucking train, I follow my instincts and get off the fucking train.
Yeah. Yeah. When are you going to get off the train? That's the question. When are you going to get off the train? What a metaphor.
And when are you going to listen to the stuff you see in front of you rather than other people telling you, like, that they just need to check one more air brake? The fact that, like, somebody like that has lied to you all day, hundreds of times, Yeah.
When is a lie? Because I don't want to go. Let me just add this a little bit. You don't want to just say trust. You don't want to like go the anti-Galileo route or whatever, right?
Yeah,
you don't want to like.
Yes, that's not what I mean. Yeah,
yeah, right. It's the people that have been lying to you and constantly lying to you. When are you going to stop believing in them and get off the train?
Right. Exactly. And obviously there are other questions of like, it's such like, it feels like gambling in a way, the opposite of gambling. Like if I pull the lever one more time, I'm going to win. And if I just wait one more thing that needs to get fixed, length of time that they keep telling me about, then I'm going to win and the train's going to start moving and so on. But at some point you're just like, that fucking train's not going anywhere, man. I don't know when it left, because by the time we left, it was probably 10:30 and it was still just sitting there. So,
Daniel, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to see you. And always so fun to talk to you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.